what I very much like as a phrase is the fetishization of leaders within organizations. And for a few years now, this has really sort of struck a chord. And in parallel, the infantilization of earlier career leaders, otherwise known as frontline managers, supervisors, middle managers, all of them are infantilized whilst this fetishization goes on. What is this phenomenon? Sadly, I think it's everywhere. And it's connected to, status, wealth, power, perceived power, or actual power, control. And of course, leaders have all of these things typically. And there is this sort of ecosystem that develops around them. And you might call it a bubble, you might call it an ivory tower, but there is this gravitational pull. And I think it affects quite a lot of functions, including the people function in organizations. And there is a lot of effort expended to cultivate these people, nurture them, keep them on side, keep them functioning, keep them from going off the rails, etc., often called leadership development. And at the same time, this infantilization is going on. And these are relative nobodies, aren't they? First-time managers, frontline managers, they're kind of nobodies. And it sort of applies, I think, in society at large. I think we and I suspect, we'll have to put our hands up to being part of the problem. Are we paying too much attention to these very visible corporate icons and not seeing the huge value of the lowly managers across organizations? And I think we are in a nutshell perhaps confusing organizational status with day-to-day influence on employees' lives, employees' motivation levels. And of course, CEOs really want performance. And if you really want performance, you'd very much focus on the levers of performance and insist that all of your support functions, or especially including the people function, for example, really focus on the levers of performance. And if you use that lens rather than power, you'll very quickly arrive at the frontline managers. This point about why we don't celebrate and properly equip line managers is a critical question, actually. And if it's not on everybody's minds, I think it really will be, because we'll have exhausted all the other ways of driving performance and engagement up, and then we'll be left with this thorny issue of quite a lot of managers in any organization. Managers outnumber leadership or senior leaders by a significant multiple, and so you will arrive at this destination one way or another. And most of the progressive people leaders that we talk to are vexed about manager development. I think here maybe I'll go away from celebrating managers as the hero of organizations to making them culpable, because so many individual contributors yearn to be promoted to that managerial position. And they understandably see it as a path to status, all of the things we talked about earlier that get you into the C-suite ultimately. And so they readily take on these positions without stopping for a moment to think, have I got the right skill set? Have I got the right attitudes to do this properly, to lead other human beings? And how do I know if all I've done so far is be part of a team? So on the one hand, it seems to be the sort of default pathway to success within organizations, to take on responsibility for others. And at the same time, I think first-time managers themselves are all too easily just taking on the responsibility or the burden without stopping to think that this is actually a craft, dare I say it, a profession. And it's just as legitimate a profession as, let's say, the operations profession or the compliance profession or the human resources profession. These are all areas where you get properly qualified to fulfill your responsibilities. And of course, there are manager qualifications, but I've really come across very few managers, first-time managers in particular, that have had any training at all. And there's a piece of research, I think it was the CIPD UK that published it. 80% of first-time managers in the UK have had no training whatsoever. And I don't think you can only point the finger at organizations. I think a big chunk of these managers have probably not thought that they need to hone their craft, to develop their skills. So I think there needs to be a mindset shift in with all of these actors on the stage, recognizing that they're fulfilling a very important responsibility and they're engaging in a new profession of management, of leading people. We need to start thinking about first-time management as the beginnings of an apprenticeship journey that culminates in mastery, but starts with apprenticeship. Roger Kneebone, a professor at Imperial at the time when I spoke to him, talks eloquently about how expertise develops. And I would love for more and more of us in organizations to embrace this concept of every first-time manager starts as an apprentice in the craft of management. And I think if we start there, then everything else will resolve itself.